How did you come to it in the first place?
In a very weird, it never occurred to me to be a comic. Because when we were growing up, we saw comics every Sunday night on Ed Sullivan, right? Did you get that in Toronto?
Yes.
Okay.
We had TV.
Well, I know, but you don't always get the same shows.
Yeah, no, we've heard of it.
I love Canadians, by the way.
You should have opened with that.
I do love Canadians because
Thank God.
you're so much nicer than us.
I don't know that we're nicer.
You're better.
We could be assholes, but we apologize.
You're
Sorry.
just better people. And I love Toronto. I've worked there a few times. Anyway, I would see these comics when we were growing up, and they were all, they were jokey. Whether it was Alan King or Joan Rivers or Jackie Mason, or I just remember seeing them and I thought they were funny, but that wasn't where my brain was to be jokey. I liked more the stuff like Carol Burnett show was more what I was leaning towards, characters stuff. And then like Friends I was just waitressing. I was lost. I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. I was in a depression, and Friends kind of forced me to get up on stage, and I did. At an open mic on Carmine Street in the West Village.
Wow.
Yeah. And there were these guys there who came up to me afterwards and said, we're opening up a club. We thought you were funny. You want to come work there? And I was like, yeah, okay. I gave them my number. And then I never got back on stage because I was too scared. And then about 3 or 4 months later, they called me. They said, remember us? We opened the club. And it was a club called Comedy U on University and 13th Street. And they said, come on down, do 10 minutes. And I was like, okay, I'll write 10 minutes. 10 minutes, you know what that was like in those days? That's like 2 hours.
2 days, yes.
Yeah. I mean, and then they just started booking me and putting me on. And I became a comic. It was kind of happenstance.
You and Joy Behar came up together, right?
Yeah. She was, they used to have these women comedy nights on Thursday nights, and that's where I met Joy. It was 1983. Yeah, that's where I met her. And she was, Joy was already 40 years old when she started.
Yeah.
So she was an adult. I was a kid. But she kind of took me under her wing, and I learned a lot from what I learned from Joy is the first time I saw Joy on stage, and she's so naturally fun. She's one of the funniest people I know. First time I saw her on stage, I was like, oh, I see what she's doing. She's just herself. It's just like how I was with my girlfriends around the kitchen table. So I realized that I just had to channel that thing.
It's funny, you're kind of regaling me with a story that is similar to me. My Joy Behar was Richard Pryor. So every night I would watch, master. But I'd watch him every night. It was the first time I was aware, because I do come from that Ed Sullivan era, where people were telling jokes. They were jokes. They were obviously, it was really clear to me that they had written material.
And a lot of times
stories.
they didn't write it.
Right. But they were little stories.
Right.
Whereas when I first saw Richard Pryor on stage, he had just finished freebasing and almost died.
Yeah.
He was on stage with his bandages, putting together what became Live on the Sunset Strip. And
Howie, this is so weird, because the first time I was ever in a comedy club was when I came here to visit, before I ever did stand-up, and my cousin took me. My cousin, Michael Pressman, had just directed Richard Pryor in Some Kind of Hero, and he took me to the Comedy Store, and he was working on that special
I was
for
in
the
the room.
Sunset Strip.
I was in every night. I never missed one night.
And it was revelatory to me, because I saw him working. I saw him workshopping.
Right.
And he had already done that brilliant special, the film that he did, the concert film.
Well, I was watching workshop the film.
Well, no, this was the Sunset Strip was after the first one that he did. He had already done that brilliant concert film, the first one.
He was burned. The one I'm talking about.
Yeah, correct. That's the one that I saw that I was at the Comedy Store for, and he was workshopping stuff, and it was like, oh my God, you mean you don't have? I thought you had to have it all set. I didn't know that you go out and work it.
Not only do you work it, and he would find whatever that line is and cross it, and then come back the next night. And so watching it many nights in a row and develop. And I also became aware of these weren't jokes he was writing. He was always talking about somebody he knew, somebody he met, something that was happening in his life, something that was always the springboard. Whereas Rodney, who I loved, there was no Vinny Boom Bots didn't exist.
Yeah.
In Richard's thing, they did exist,
and that's why I think so many comics will say that Pryor is their number one idol, because he had amazingly funny stories. He did characters. He opened up his heart and soul and just laid it all out there in a way that people were not doing before that. It was all about material before him. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because seeing him was like a ding, ding, ding in my head.
Me too.
Where it was like, oh, that's how you do this. I thought you had to, have like a set thing that you just went on stage and you memorized it, like
but it
Alan
wasn't
King.
or Alan King or
George. They were brilliant, but it didn't relate to me.
Or me, George Carlin. Like I liked the hippy dippy weatherman, but I would never write the hippy dippy. I could never.
Carlin was all about material. He was all about the written word, and the words were really important to him. If you watch him now, you see, and that was never my thing either.
No. It's a more, I relate to you because we're characters.
Yeah.
And people know our characters.
Right.
Or a part of our character.
Right.
Not really whoever we decide we want to present. But not.
I remember seeing you way back in the mid 80s at Caroline's, the original Caroline's on 28th Street. Remember that?
I do.
And you had hair like mine.
Yes. I look like you.
Yes. And I remember
great.
seeing you, and you were so funny. And then I started dating this guy. And I asked him who his favorite comic was, and he said Howie Mandel. I was like, okay, like when you're dating somebody, like if they said like, I don't know who.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be negative, but if he said somebody that I really thought wasn't funny, I couldn't have gone out with him. But I remember he said Howie Mandel.
How cool is that? But I remember doing Caroline's. I was there. That was the first time I did that Franklin show. What was his name?
Oh, Joe Franklin.
Joe Franklin.
Yes, I did his show many times.
She booked me on the Joe Franklin show, which is you should look. I don't know.
WOR in New York.
It was the craziest. Billy Crystal used to do a Joe Franklin on Saturday Night Live, but it was like this. It was almost like somebody doing a show in their basement. But
right. Well, it was. He had the comb over. And then he had the line across his chin with the pancake makeup.
Yes.
And yeah.
So it was just I did that, but I was in New York. I had a great time. It's funny because we never crossed paths.
No.
But we were when I was playing Caroline's, you were there in the room. When I was watching Richard Pryor, you were there in the room. We've been around each other a lot.
I know, and Caroline's was a major thing for me because Richard Belzer, another dear friend who was dearly departed. Don't get me started on Lewis. He asked me to open for him. I had just been in the business like 3 months. He asked me to open for him at Caroline's. And Caroline and the whole group saw me at the old club on 28th Street, which was a great room. It was a fantastic room. And then they asked me to open for Gilbert. And that was the first time I met Gilbert. And that dates back, I think, was 1984 when I became such good friends with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not to start you on Lewis, but I one of the big springboards for me in comedy was HBO Young Comedian Special.
That's right.
And
that was Rodney's. No. Okay. Because Rodney did a couple of those.
Rodney launched like Dice and he did those Rodneys, but I did a Young Comedian Special hosted by the Smothers Brothers.
Oh,
it was I think it was the 6th annual. The young comedians on my special were me, Jerry Seinfeld, Richard Lewis, and Harry Anderson.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Lewis, were you friendly with Lewis? Lewis was something special.
I didn't know him that well.
Yeah.
I've worked with him a couple times. Every time I saw him, he was like the sweetest guy.
Couldn't have been sweeter. The most generous, kind, loving, and insane, completely out of his mind person.